Tuesday, and I want to play some Rise to Runes with you guys. And before we get into some more details for what we'll be doing today, just gonna check that all the stream settings are okay, and that looks all right. I need to make absolutely sure that my restream is doing what it's supposed to, because I had a stream not too long ago where it didn't restream towards Facebook for some reason, but it seems to be doing all right. Anyways, in the right category, right title, everything cool. So it's a bit of a weird time frame that I'm streaming today, and the reason why is that I might not be home during the weekend. So in order to make up for it, I figured that I should probably do some streaming earlier in this week instead to compensate. So let's just get Rise to Runes started. It's like for some reason whenever I'm not playing Rimworld, I always feel better about starting the stream without having the game loaded because of how long it takes for Rimworld. Even though technically, it should be ready and all that to go. But this gives people a chance to drop by. Oh yeah, that reminds me. Twitch integration. I still haven't looked up what that actually does for Rise to Runes, but I did notice that when I went through the options just to go through it on the first session and see if there was anything interesting in there, that was that Twitch integration. And I have no idea what that actually does. So maybe that's one of the things we'll also look up today. It's like a little side thing. Anyways, so where were we? Oh yeah, we just gotten a new god perk and we're in Coast Bridge. And reach a population of 115 should be easy to do. This is going to be a weird one, sending 170 bows back to Enchanted Shoreline. We can do that, but we don't have the infrastructure to accomplish it at the moment. Though we're almost done dealing with the corruption, so maybe we can get started on that task, because it's not one of those tasks that I feel we should just skip, because it's a pretty easy one to complete, and whenever there's an easy objective, you should probably consider doing it rather than skipping it, because chances is that the next goal that you get objective might be borderline, not impossible, nothing's impossible, but might be an objective that you're just never gonna end up doing because it requires you to spend like a ridiculous amount of time in a map that you've already played for like several hours, and you have no reason to go back to that place. But yeah, I might not be home during the weekend, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to stream earlier in the week, but the reason why it's later in the day is because I'm still like spending time working on a Rimworld mod, or a collection of mods rather. They kind of all interplay in various ways, but for all intents and purposes they're kind of designed to go together, so I don't really think about them necessarily as separate mods. It's just that by making them separate, it allows me to provide people with options. And today I did just release the first one in that collection, or whatever you want to call it, which is a Rimworld mod that retextures rock walls, ore walls, and also the I always forget what they're called again, because they're not called, I think they're called compacted machinery. Basically an ore that specifically provides you with components, since that one has a specific like texture to it, and that isn't shared with anything else in the game.
Submit!
And it's just been a very big challenge to get that done. Fragilitas? Well, thanks for the follow. How are you doing today? Did you just pop in? Or did you get a chance to hear me talk about Rimworld mods? But yeah, I basically put it up on the workshop today. So, is there any way that I can actually share that? That might be Steam Workshop Rimworld. And it doesn't look like a lot of time went into the mod necessarily. Because of how quote-unquote simple it is. Like, it's literally just 4 textures, but holy hell, I had a lot of trouble getting that all to play well together. Dragon's ore and stone retexture. I have contemplated if I should figure out a different name for it, but I don't know if you can even do that once it's published. Rise to Runes can kind of like handle itself at this point, so I'm not too worried doing things off stream. Which reminds me that I also need to get Streamraiders booted up, since I do have that in the title today. And as long as people are interested in it, I will run it, of course. So it's just I have had a few instances where basically no people were even in Streamraiders, let alone watching the stream. So in those cases it becomes a little bit pointless, but I'll wait like an hour, I think, before we start on the Streamraiders thing, because we are like right up against a hard map. So, and I believe when I stopped streaming last time we were about, how many? 18 like units plus or something, and if I went in and started now, no one were to join, it would just be like, okay, instant fail, even if there were like a handful of people, most likely, given the difficulty of the map. But yeah, so in terms of, I'll get back to the Rimworld mod later when there's more people around, but it's up there and it's available now, which that's like a huge sigh of relief, I suppose you can say, because I was having, like, I wasn't even intending on doing that reskin in the first place, but for context, the other part of the mod series that I'm working on is a collection of ores that are like not inherently original, but they have like either heavy, like they are either original or are like heavily inspired by existing like fantasy metals, such as Mithril being a very noteworthy one. Whereas a lot of them, as I said, are a little bit more original in terms of their like name and stuff, but they're also sort of an imagining of, if you had a world full of these fantasy ores with all kinds of magical properties, what kind of name would you give them? What kind of properties could you translate that, like, that they would have into a Rimworld context and stuff? So it's a bit of a challenge to myself to also try and see if you can like incorporate a lot of variety in the ores and how that changes the game. Because I've been using a lot of mods in the past myself that add a lot of different types of ores to the game, either as part of production chains or in some instances just like what I'm doing myself, just on a smaller scale, so to speak. And I just wanted to see like how much I could get away with without it basically cluttering the game. Because there are some interesting stats you can put on to like properties you can put on materials in Rimworld And even some of the mods that do explicitly implement like ores just for the sake of having more variety don't quite seem to really utilize all the different things you can. Like for instance, one of the stats directly modify door opening speeds, and from what I could see there was only one of the modded ores through the two material. Well, yeah, I haven't checked the gemstone one, but basically I checked a fantasy metals one and a material expanded one, which adds like iron and copper and a bunch of other stuff that's not in the base game. But out of all those ores that they introduced, only one from the fantasy metals one actually affected door opening speed. Wait, no, that's a lie. None of them did. Only one of the vanilla ores did. I think it's uranium that lowers the door opening speed. But for all the other materials, none of them utilize that stat whatsoever. Now, it is used in the vanilla game a couple places. As I said, uranium is one of them. Another material will be the stone doors, like stony materials, and wood. Wood being like, I believe it gets a positive modifier, or it just might be 100%. I believe it gets a positive modifier. AKA if you make a wooden door, they open faster than any other material. But because of their other stats, they don't exactly provide with a lot of durability and that kind of stuff. Plus, they're highly flammable since they're made out of wood. So, kind of just have a few instances that utilize the stat. But what I want to do with my mod is that I want to try and make like something that's a little bit different than what already exists, because the fantasy metals one does some of the things I want to do, but the way that mod specifically is structured is that each of the ores that it introduces is supposed to be the best in their category, so to speak, meaning that, you know, there's no pros and cons between choosing between the different ores, apart from the fact that you're choosing, well, actually you're not really making a choice, because there's no pros and cons, but rather there is, you know, if you want to make, I don't know, melee weapons, you want to use Scarletite if you can get your hands on it, because it's the de facto best one for those kinds of applications. Whereas for armor, there are a few things there that you can do, but it's mostly like adamantite provides sharpness resistance, vibranium provided, I think it was blunt resistance, and then another one provided heat damage resistance. So nothing where it's like, oh, you get, you know, heat damage resistance or piercing resistance or blunt resistance, and then you lose some of the other. It's always like, oh, it's just better in this particular category, and then it gives you some of the other stats as well, just to a lesser degree. So in other words, if you want to balance out like getting the maximum amount of like defensive stats on your damage reduction, if you want it to be like leveled out, so to speak, you would make certain parts of your armor out of different materials to get that bonus across different areas. But for a lot of applications, it's always going to be like one particular thing that's the best, with adamantite as well being the best one for building structures out of, because it has 0 flammability and it has the highest amount of hit points. Since a lot of the stats don't really apply to buildings, there are a few ones, but yeah, the main point being, of course, that in a normal playthrough you don't really have this issue where a lot of the materials are rare, or you do have that issue where they're quite rare, so it gets balanced out by, you know, adamantite being quite hard to acquire. But at least on stream, I am playing with TTK and in the past Puppeteer until it gets, you know, updated to 1.3. And when you play with TTK, people will just automatically like hone in on the best of the best they can acquire for something and just save up their coins until they can eventually buy those things. And as a result, even though adamantite in this case being the most expensive material, it is no longer the rarest. It just takes more coins to buy for people, and they would rather spend a little bit of extra coins on something that's slightly more expensive, relatively speaking, in order to get something that is like, you know, more than 100% better than anything else, essentially. It's not even up to debate. Like, it's so much the best in their category that there's no reason to use any of the other materials for those particular applications. So what I want to try and do is have more of a give and take relationship between the different ones. Of course, rarity is going to be included, but I don't want to have like an ore that provides, I believe adamantite provided 400%, was it 800% modifier on the hit points? Like it was ridiculous. I believe I made a blast door from one of the mods that I'm using, and it had, I think 16,000, or was it 32,000 even? I think at least 16,000 hit points. Like a door that was virtually indestructible. And because it was made out of adamantite, it was also non-flammable. If you made it out of regular steel, it would still have some kind of flammability to it. So the trade-off could be that, I don't know, you get like a material that's fairly durable, maybe not like at a full whopping 400%, but like it's very durable, for instance, but then it has some kind of detrimental effect. Like that's kind of how uranium is balanced in the game. It's very good to use for its damage purposes on weapon, but it does also reduce the attack speed, if I remember correctly. So you can make a melee blunt weapon that is better if you use uranium, but it's also going to be slower. And I think it's the same. That's probably also why it has that door sliding speed modifier, since it's slower at opening and closing than doors out of other materials, but because it is uranium, it is also way more durable than most other materials. And that's kind of how you should balance things, I feel. Now, will I be able to do it with all the ores that I've planned out? I'm not so sure. It's going to be a challenge for sure, and I'll try and do my best to make it somewhat interesting. Also because there are some stats that I've looked at and that you can use that is something that you hardly ever really consider when playing that game. And one of them is like, I think it was heat and cold insulation. Now, see, I don't know if it only affects armors. It might do. But I suppose the idea could be that since metal armors in the game aren't really supposed to give you a lot of heat or cold insulation, maybe you could make one of the metals have like some kind of elemental fire affinity, so that though it not being necessarily the best, like it might have like some mediocre or better than average, most likely, heat damage resistance, but also some kind of heat insulation capabilities to like complement it with, so that you could actually use like, you know, a metal armor in a very cold environment. And the same goes for cold. There's a cold insulation stat as well. Now there isn't any damage resistance type you could like hook it up with, but maybe you could do something else instead. Say, oh, it has like improved door opening speed because it's a more smooth material, or something, right? There's a lot of stuff you can do with it. And of course, the rarities have a lot to say when you're playing it regularly, which is what honestly you should be balancing your mods toward. But I do think this added challenge of making it more interesting for TTK could be cool. Because it would also make the mod more like generally useful outside of just being a bunch of extra materials. Because there's also a Rimworld of magic, right? And that one adds like a lot of magic themed things on its own, even its own material like magicite, unless I assume that's still in there. It's been a while. But you know, maybe you can do some cool things. And like a very distant future project could maybe be like some kind of patch integrations into other mods, or who knows, even use the materials for a magical crafting thing, something. To begin with, it's just supposed to be useful for like weapons and armor and structures, of course. And here's like one of those stats that I did mention, like the heat and cold insulation. See, as far as I'm aware, and I don't know if the stats are reflecting this, but depending on whether or not you are in an enclosed room with a proper floor and walls, as opposed to being in a stone cave, it does actually change like the temperature and how it behaves in that particular room. And what I was wondering is if the heat and cold insulation also affects the walls now and potential flooring. But now the thing is, in game by default you can't see these stats anywhere. You need a separate mod in order to be able to see all this stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Most things you can of course see, like on clothing. When you produce the thing, you can see what its temperature tolerances are, as opposed to like the same, I don't know, chest plate armor that's made out of a different material, essentially. But yeah, I think it has the potential to add a lot of variety to the game. I mean, that's kind of what the original mods that I did mention, like the Fantasy Metals one, I assume was their intent, to add more of that variety to the game, so to speak. Since having more different ways to build your armor and weapons means that, due to the randomness factor, you know, if it's spawning in, and even if you do like deep drilling or mining or something, you know, not every playthrough is going to be the same. You might have one playthrough where you've just been more lucky to find material out of a few select of these, but there might even be some from within the mod that you didn't even find at all yet. Because obviously it also reflects in the gear that enemies use, which is probably like, that's where I noticed the impact of the mods that I already were using had the biggest effect, because the game doesn't really care about min-maxing when it comes to creating enemies for you to fight and raids to take out and such. It kind of just is provided with a points-based budget, and then depending on how valuable the different materials are, because, you know, they have like a wealth, like a wealth stat or whatever you want to call it. It's called something specific, I can't quite remember it at the top of my head, but you know, the general gist is just that that it uses that to sort of figure out how expensive the armor is going to be, and weapons and whatnot else they can carry around or even drop us. I wonder if the loot that they drop is also calculated that way. Don't know. But the general gist is that all their equipment, so the strength of the enemies is based off of the wealth and everything. So the more variety you have of all the different ores and their values in terms of how, you know, valuable they are, the more variety you're also going to see in the raids that attack you. Assuming that the enemy can actually spawn with gear that is stuffable, as they say. Basically stuffable meaning that rocks, trees, anything like that's a material in Rimworld has sort of just been, it's more like now considered just stuff. So whenever you see something that is considered stuffable, it just means it can be made out of different materials, aka stuffs. Which is a little bit weird of a way to say it, because it's kind of like if you're asked by someone whether or not, like, what you're good at, and you just say, oh, I'm just good at doing things. Like, I just do things and stuff, you know? It's so unspecified that the person asking the question didn't exactly get an answer at the end of it either, because you didn't really provide an answer. You just kind of said you're doing something but not what. So, but yeah, anyways, so that's kind of what I'm working on these days, and also part of why my stream schedule has been all fucked. Well, part of it, but it's been a big part of it. And when I was developing this materials mod, my relatively short-sighted, what do you call it, way of looking at things was that, okay, I can, while mods are being updated for 1.3, I can spend time working on these material mods, and then within like 2 weeks or something, all the mods for 1.3 are gonna be done, and I can start on the medieval magic playthrough that I wanted to do. Or so I thought. And now we're here. Mods for Rimworld is still being updated. Some of the most important ones have and are more or less ready to be used. And some of them are like in a development stage where they're like still testing things out, and people in the comments are reporting issues here and there that they occasionally do discover, such as Rimworld of Magic is updated for 1.3, but as like a, I think it is still considered a preview version or whatever you want to call it. So basically it might take a while before everything's super stable, but that's just how it is sometimes. The biggest thing though is that when I was making my ores mod, I was trying to, I was taking some closer looks at the actual ores, and then I realized that the vanilla textures are kind of shit for rock walls and minerals and all that stuff. And you know, I get it from the developer side. They made these textures, I assume, like a billion years ago when Rimworld was still in early versions of development, and they just never went back and changed them. And I think with good reason. I mean, Rimworld is so popular, and a lot of people are making so many mods in the game that even for something as small and simple as them going in and doing a single retexture could upset people. You know, so it's probably easier for the developers to just not do anything, like not try intentionally and make the game look prettier, because people are gonna complain that, oh, you changed the style of the game, now it doesn't fit with X mod, or I like the old stone texture better even though it is objectively bad when you look into the details of it. But still, you know, that kind of just opens up so that people like myself, for instance, can go in and improve upon these small, minute, otherwise, well, I suppose kind of not that important things, because it's just a texture at the end of the day. But yeah, it's so I saw these textures were basically not as high quality as I thought they were. And what surprised me even more was that the retexturing mods that I were using didn't do a good job either. Or rather, they didn't do a good enough job to my own standards, I suppose. But in terms of what they're supposed to do, which is, you know, provide a higher resolution or less compressed version of textures for Rimworld mods, they didn't really do a good enough job on the ores. And it might just be something that slipped in through the cracks or something. So basically, for the ores in Rimworld, for those that don't know, they comprise of two different textures actually. There is a version of the rock walls that has a bunch of like the speckles or whatever you want to call it. I think the original texture is called fleckered stone or something. And to accompany this texture, there is a green and red masking texture that is used by the game to figure out where the primary and secondary colors of the rock walls for the ores are supposed to go. So what that means is that by default you have like a grayscale black and white texture as the main thing, and then the game multiplies one of two colors that are defined for a material. So if I define, like, if we take steel, compacted steel as an example, in the XML file for the compacted steel, there is a section for two color inputs. I can't remember if it's called 1 and 2 or primary and secondary. It doesn't really matter. They're just two different colors. And those then get multiplied, the primary color being on, I believe, the green areas where it's more green, and then the more red it is, the more of the secondary color you get. And what's really surprising to see is that the mods on the workshop that I've been using, at least, that change these ore textures, for some reason they don't make their own mask either. Or either they just don't make their own mask. Which means that they have this very well done retexture of like this speckled ore stone thingy. But then it still uses the vanilla ore mask, which is not aligned with where they placed the ore specs in the original texture, because in order to what do you call it, for these colors to have like a larger effect, the more white you have on the original texture, the brighter a color you get in the end, because it's it's like multiplying two numbers, right? If you multiply two high numbers with each other, you get a higher end number than if they were lower numbers. And the same goes true with colors. So basically anywhere that this mask doesn't align with the base texture, you get a darker, or you just get a different color as a result. And it does mean a couple things. For instance, you can technically just take the original stone wall texture and use that exact same texture as the one you do for your ores, and then the mask goes in and colorizes everything, and you would still see these specks everywhere, because as long as they're present in the mask, you know, it sort of follows through, if you will. And for some reason, just these mods didn't do these masks, which results in some higher quality texture work that's more tight being kind of ruined by a low quality texture mask. That being said though, there's like so many things to unpack. Because, see, I originally just wanted to do this retexture because of the ore mask not being present. And then immediately I realized, well, if I want to do an ore retexture and I don't want to base it off someone else's work, because, you know, as easy as it would be, I do still respect that it's not my mod, so I'm not gonna, first of all, do someone else's work. And I believe it's part of the vanilla expanded team, so they most likely don't have the time, especially not now, to deal with that small, minute issue, essentially, which it essentially is. You know, it's just a pet peeve, because it's not like it breaks the game, it just doesn't look correct as what the original artist even intended. But that was part of it. And instead of doing just the ore texture, I figured, well, since I'm already doing the ore texture from scratch, I might as well make the rock texture as the baseline, because then you could, you know, I use Krita for my texturing, and that way I could just have different layer groups so that I could toggle the ore on and off, so it was easy to work with. And it also would allow me to have full creative control over what I did with this, so that it would also be as compatible with the fantasy ores that I'm doing, because they're kind of like, they're very colorful, which is not something you really see in the base game. And as such, the way that the ores visually are shown, like present in the game of Rimworld, they don't really, they were never made for bright colors, let's just put it that way. And as a result, it introduces some new problems, which I'll get into. But for now, just know that I wanted to basically make and have control over my own sort of mod setup. So then I started doing this texture stuff, and oh man, there were like so many issues that popped up. Where the short story is that it meant that I essentially had to redraw the entire texture for the ore and the stone 3 times over. Now, I did have like some structure to my approach, so it was just a matter of taking the layers that I had already organized into my document and then repaint them. But I still had to do that 3 times from the ground up, and after I did it the 3rd time, even then a lot of time needed to be spent extra tweaking. And even though I've released it today, I am noticing some things that I kind of want to fix and address in the future. So far I just haven't gotten around, have the time for it, and I just wanted to get the mod out there. But yeah, that's basically what ended up happening. And something that was supposed to be just the ores mod, which if I only did that and had tested it, would maybe have taken me like, you know, 4 days spread throughout 2 weeks maybe to make, test and finish. And then maybe like a day or two extra to polish it and put it up on the workshop too. But what I'm basically missing right now is that I need to still put in the variables for all the materials properties. And since I just basically started making the reskin, since I noticed a bunch of ugliness when I was trying to take like some screenshot of my textures to show off in my Discord. So one of the things that I noticed is that even the vanilla Rimworld textures do not tile properly, and it's a bit of a weird one because based off of how the source files are structured and what the textures look like, it seems they knew that the developers were aware of how they were making these textures, but for some reason they kind of, I assume they overlooked some things. And as I said earlier, these textures were probably made like what's essentially an eternity ago at this point. And they just never looked back to actually fix these issues, which left in a bunch of weird stuff. So one thing is that all the textures, even in the vanilla game, do not tile correctly, which means that if you're a modder and you just follow the template, if you will, of where the textures are located, because it's a texture atlas, so it's one texture that contains multiple smaller textures that then in the game engine get cut out, right? So if you just use that template to a T and base your texture off the originals, you're gonna make like a texture that is worse in quality as a result. So it's a weird thing. So basically it's a texture atlas that has a 4x4 grid of individual textures that make up all the different pieces, if you will, of the rocks, so that you can have curves, T cross intersections in all four directions, a regular cross intersection, you know, a singular stone, etc. And it just fits in with a 4x4 perfectly. And here's where it gets weird with that one. For some reason, and I might know why, but the devs put an insanely large margin in between each of these textures. So one thing is that the texture itself is also not a texture size to the power of 2, which is something that I've always learned, especially with Unity, is something that you should always make sure to do because of how Unity treats your textures. So what I mean is that your texture should be like, you know, 128 by 128, 256 by 256, or it can also be what do you call it, unequal sides or like lengths or whatever. So you can have like a 512 by 128, no problem. It just has to be able to go up into the power of 2 at the end of the day. So if you make like a 13 by 13 texture, you're actively breaking this rule, and the closest you would go up to then is a 16 by 16, and then scale it down in the game in order to fit your need case, your use case, so to speak. Or heck, you would make it an 8 by 8 instead. Either way, it just means that you should always keep your textures to this and then trim them down in the game, or like rescale them to your needs. I could be wrong, of course, but that's just what I've been sort of taught and stuff. So that's one thing that's awkward about the vanilla game textures, because they don't follow that rule. So that means if you make your own texture in the same scale as the developers did, I can't remember what the resolution on it is, but it's like a really weird one. And because of the margin then as well, that's around each texture in the atlas, the actual end resolution that you have to work with is even smaller. So not only, you know, do you have like a quarter of the whole texture for each of your individual stone walls, but that area itself is also shrunk down by, was it 10 or 20%, I believe, is just gone due to the margin being so massive. And that also means that if you paint your texture like I did to the outer board, like if you basically set up a 8x8 grid inside Krita or whatever you're using for painting, and you just paint the textures out to the outer edges, well, then those last remaining 10-20% or whatever that is within the margin of each cell gets cut off in the game, because that's what the game, how it's set up in Unity, is that that margin is just like a cutoff zone. And you might be wondering yourself, why do they have that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Since how Rimworld, or they're using Unity's feature to compress textures, means that there's basically they're using Unity's built-in like compression system or whatever the heck you want to call it, in order to make the textures take up less memory and all the things that you would from a game optimizations kind of side, right? So they're compressing all the textures down in the game, and that introduces a few issues. For instance, a lot of artifacting can happen. So it's like if you take, you know, any image processing program and you save an image as a JPEG with 50% compression, it looks like complete crap when it comes out on the out on the other end. So, you know, that's kind of what they're doing, but they're doing it in runtime, which means that if you already compress something before it's run through this further compression that happens at runtime, then it looks even worse. But I digress. So the problem of this is that if you have a texture atlas and you were to go out to the outer edges of the grid, there might be a little bit of what we even call it, like pixel bleed, or like texturing bleed, or whatever you want to call it. Basically, pixels at the outer edge right next to the cell, well, next to the area that your texture is located in, those pixels might be like bleeding into the texture next to it because of how the filtering sometimes like causes pixels to bleed outwards, so they actually spread out a little bit more, creating like this blurred effect. And as such, you know, you would get like artifacts from one of the different stone walls in another stone wall texture. Most likely in cases like if you have let's use an example. Actually, you have a bend that goes from the southern corner up into the right corner, right? So that means on the northern side and the western side, and this is going to be flipped for you, so that's great. But basically on the northern and western side, along that edge, there's going to be no pixels that connect to the outer edges of that area where your texture is located. And then on the connection points to the outer edges of the texture area, you know, you would have a little bit of bleed of the texture pixels and whatnot. So what you can do there is that I know Photoshop has like some tools that you can download for this. I would assume Krita has too, but I didn't really look up for it. But what most game asset developers would probably do is use like an inflation tool or filter. So it basically takes the outermost pixels of your texture and then it inflates them, and that way propagates the textures along the outer edges, the pixels on the outer edges, sorry, into other areas of your texture, and that removes like this bleeding effect that I mentioned due to compression. And you kind of want to do that because, for instance, with Rimworld's walls, if you just paint within cells that are provided, and you just don't touch the margin that the devs decided to have in there, then you get the opposite effect of having pixels bleed in, where it's bleeding in the transparency as well. So that basically means you get this nice grid-like pattern at the outer edges of all your textures. So whenever you put it in your game, in Rimworld specifically, you'll just have this white, seemingly transparent grid that just goes in between all your tiles. And you also don't want that, of course. And that's where it gets like so annoying to work with because of this margin. Since the first version, I just painted out to the fucking edges, assuming that the whole grid was actually used, realizing then that, oh, it's not. And then I had to reverse engineer that margin to know exactly where the cutoff was, because the source images doesn't show you that, and no way in hell you're going to be able to Google your way to an answer like this, because it's just an arbitrary decision that the developers took, like at some point, or the artist took, or whoever took it. And there's even like some indication to me that an artist made an asset and the programmer made a decision not talking with the artist, and I'll get to that in a moment too. But basically, you know, it creates this really annoying environment to work in, where you take two steps forward and you take one step back. So I had the complete texture and everything for the rock wall ready, and I was like super excited to share it with my Discord. And then I realized when I opened up the game that for some reason the black boundaries of like the stroke around the outer edges of the cliffs were not really there for the most part. And even though I perfectly tiled them in my setup and everything so that, you know, they would connect properly, they were like intersecting in really weird ways, and it was just looking absolutely terrible. And what's really weird, like this is something, as I said, where I think a developer and an artist didn't communicate properly, or however it may be, because if you look at the vanilla game or textures, you'll notice that the speckled rocks in there, they don't actually tile at all. So what that tells me is that the mask texture that they decided to implement to get the two color tones on the textures was probably implemented a while after they made the texture for the ores, and that mask was not made by an artist, is my assumption. A programmer, or, well, not saying that they necessarily had dedicated artists either, but someone who didn't make the original texture, let's put it that way, or didn't consider it, just decided to continue, like took the ore texture and then copied it over, painted it green with like a modifier or something, and then put it on a red background and call it a day. Like that's kind of what it feels like, because also when you open up the texture for the ores, in there is a hidden layer that's not used in the game, or ore to be placed on top, on the top of the stones, on the ore rocks. And that's kind of weird, because in the game those on the top are only present in the mask, they're not in the actual texture itself, which is a bit of an added oddity, because that either means that someone decided that we're not going to have ores on the top anyway, but then that was after they made the color masking and they didn't apply that same decision to the color mask. And that's kind of why the ores on the top of all the ore rock walls or whatever are darker than the ones on the side because they didn't use this ore texture for the specs, so to speak, in the current implementation of the game. I don't know, it's not something major, it's just very interesting, the kind of discoveries that you can sort of infer, because it's not 100%, you can never know this kind of stuff, but I just think it's funny to try and dissect this kind of stuff when you're working with it, and like, what the fuck were they thinking, you know? Because clearly they were thinking. I mean, you don't just make a game by chance, so these were decisions that were made at some point, and yeah, it's just quirky, I guess. And this is where it gets back to that whole thing where I mentioned, if you base your texture off of like another texture that, like the vanilla game, and the vanilla game didn't do 100% great job at implementing their own, like the idea is there, right? The method is there in the game, it's used, it's just not implemented properly. To Coast Bridge. Well, we got this task up. God wall spell cost. Okay, whatever. We gotta start sending these golems with bows to enchanted shorelines too somehow. So that's gonna be interesting. And then send 10 courier golems to Coast Bridge. Huh. That would mean we would have to play on Enchanted Shoreline or another map, so although this would be an easy one to do... Okay, let's do that one quickly. Because I'm thinking like either we need to do it right now or we need to skip it and do some like it in favor of getting a different goal there. Because we do have the setup here, and the chance is that a lot of these golems are just gonna head there anyway. But we could literally just say send like, you know, random things to Coast Bridge. That being said though, we are already sending random things to Coast Bridge. Not random, but you know what I mean. Wait, I have an idea. What if we send bows to Coast Bridge to be sent back? That wouldn't be weird at all. I mean, it would be legal. Kind of weird, but legal. And then we'll just bump up the amount of courier suppliers and reduce organizers a little bit to have some people be unemployed and have like some free time. Okay, that's things in Rise to Ruins taken care of. But yeah, so the whole texturing process for this mod has just been a roller coaster. And instead of it taking, first of all, those 2 weeks to do the ore mod changes, it's just taking me a month to get this fucking thing done. Even with some days I've been like spending a ridiculous amount of hours on working on this thing. And to make it even worse, there's that whole part about me starting over twice. So the first time was because I painted out to the outer edges of the texture, and it kind of didn't look like it had that cutoff issue. So I could use, as I said, all the methods in place in terms of how I was handling all my layers and doing each individual texture and the method for making them tile, all that stuff. You know, I'd planned that, figured that stuff out at this point. I just needed to paint it correctly within the allowed zone, I suppose you can say, which was now the actual remaining challenge. But then when I did the second version of it, I realized another horrible issue that I didn't quite contemplate, and that was the rock walls and everything else's ability to tile well with things that were not rock walls. Now, I'd basically been testing my mod almost in a vacuum in this sense, even though some of those things that I needed to test with were in the vanilla game. I just weren't trying them out together. So what I mean is that I didn't check to see if the way that I was painting my textures would tile well with a normally human-made wall, for instance. And like, it hurts to admit it, but I just didn't consider it. And this is one of those things where it's like, you know, I was just being a dumbass, not thinking about this in advance, because of course, you know, the rock walls and stuff are such a big part of the Rimworlds. Like, they're on every map, you know, almost, basically, almost. But they're ever present, because whenever a meteor falls, even they're gonna be there, you know. So almost no matter which map you go on, there's gonna be rocks and stuff. So having them look right and appropriate is very important to me personally, and I think generally speaking too, because, you know, they're like one of the things that you spend the most time looking at in the game. And because I hadn't like, what do you call it, planned out where the top part of the rock walls and the, you know, front sides and back end of the wall should be on the, you know, small grid-like areas, it meant that when I finally was done with my second iteration and put it in the game, I realized that the walls were way too thin, because I thought, oh, okay, I can like push the textures in a little bit to add for more detail out on the outer edges, so I have a little bit more of like curvature, variety, and make them look more organic. But in doing so, I introduced an issue where they didn't really tile with regular walls well. So you would just have like, you know, a regular wall in Rimworld takes up a full tile, so in order to make them compatible with stony walls and such, like rock walls, the outermost edges of those rock textures have to go, well, to the outer edge where they connect to like another texture, basically, if that makes any sense. And I hadn't done that, so it just didn't align whatsoever and looked absolutely fucking terrible. It even looked like, it basically looked like the walls were way too small, and you had like, yeah, it's hard to explain without looking at it. It just take my word for it, looked absolutely terrible. And at this point, you know, okay, I knew what I was doing, so I wasn't afraid to make a third iteration, and absolutely had to do it, because otherwise, you know, there would have been no point. It didn't fit with everything else. It kind of didn't hit one of those objectives I had with the mod, which was it needed to be vanilla compatible and look vanilla-esque as well, so that it would be compatible with other mods that focus on like the vanilla art style in the game. You don't want it to like stick out like a sore thumb in those cases. So I went ahead and started redoing the whole thing a third time. Now, this being the third time meant that I had all the layers where they needed to be. I just needed to extend them. Like the top parts of the textures were like separate layers, and the front side and the left and right sides and the back side were all like 3 different layers. Thankfully, when I did the noise mapping, because I also added a bit of a noise texture on top of it, not like slightly subtle, you can notice it when you look like closely, but I wanted to add some noise mapping as well, so that it kind of makes the rocks look less clean, because even though in the vanilla game they're very clean looking, they do actually have a noise map. It's just very, very subtle and doesn't show up in the game whatsoever, because it's the equivalent of having compression on your image. Like, that's how subtle it is. So because the texture in the game has compression on it, you don't notice that the actual texture itself has noise, because it's basically the same. The noise map that the artist put in there, it gets obscured by the fact that the noise generated from, you know, the filters make the same kind of effect. But I digress. So I put my own noise mapping in there, and thankfully the way that I did it meant that the noise maps are just like a tiling texture that I made that goes like over all the different rock parts, if you will. Each cell has like a square where it's like a tiling texture, you know. So I basically made like a texture for the entire image, if you will, and then I just used the alpha mask as a mask for these noise maps, so that they would just align with whatever underlying texture work I'd done for the rocks themselves. So I basically didn't have to touch any of that whatsoever. Also, the way that I do the outlines for the rocks meant that I didn't have to touch those either, because I basically do that as a layer effect. So it takes the entire group for that particular part, like if you imagine a T cross section, like that T cross section has its own layer group, and then in there's like the top of the texture, the size as I mentioned, and everything else. And then on the group itself I have a layer effect that then generates a stroke around it that makes sure that it's always equally weighted, and, you know, most importantly, dynamically shaped to whatever changes I make. And to improve even further on my texturing process, I actually also have a mask that is like texture wide, so that it's only each cell in which the given rock wall piece texture is located at that actually shows through. So anything that's outside, like I can overdraw out in the edges and not have to go back and clean them up, because it just gets cut away through a group-wide mask, essentially, which is very handy, because that's also very useful with the stroke effect, because then you can have the stroke go wherever you want outside of the texture, and because you cut everything outside of that, well, not texture, but outside of the cell, and you get me right, and because it gets cut off through the mask, then you can be pretty messy with it, and it's very forgiving. And again, very useful when you have to go back and redo a lot of stuff, because you can just turn your brain off and just focus down on just painting the things that you already know how you want to do. And then once I was done with the third iteration, I went back and I did a few tweaks here and there and cleaned up a few things. And then today I published it on the workshop. So with that long ass explanation, that's why it's taken me so fucking long to make this thing happen. And ugh. And, you know, I wouldn't be surprised from the developer's side that when they originally made this, they might have spent like maybe a day on it. Maybe a day on, like half a day on the texture and a day on implementing some kind of prototype for the wall. That's kind of what I imagine. And that's just what it is when, like, what it's like when you're doing modding. You kind of need to sometimes, if you want to do a high quality thing at least, dissect what's going on behind the scenes, because there's no manual for most of these things. You know, having a code documentation for parts of a game is really nice, but it kind of made me wonder when we're gonna see like artists be required to put documentation into their asset documents, because I've met a few highly talented artists in the past who were working on game related artwork in my team that I was in at some point, and they have surprisingly little technical knowledge of not only how like very little technical knowledge outside of their field. They're super talented artists that can draw the most amazing things, but some of them don't even necessarily know how, like, which cables belong into their monitor. Like, it's not even a joke. It's sometimes that wild that they have so little technical experience that they don't even necessarily know how to get the programs that they need to work with installed on the computer that they're using, which just boggles my mind. Especially because, well, sometimes not so much, maybe. I mean, I always take everything I say with a grain of salt. It's not because I'm trying to bash on them or anything. As I say, they're like highly talented and can draw things way better than I could ever do. And what I think is happening is that, if you take an education that's related to creating artwork, I assume, and this is just assumptions of course, but I assume that the main focus is going to be on painting techniques, that you can then sort of translate into digital artwork, because working in a physical medium is very different than working in one that is purely digital. So there are different priorities in terms of what's important. And there's actually a very interesting side note to this. Something I read a long ass time ago in relation to Command & Conquer Tiberian Dawn, actually. Westwood Studios specifically. And their recruitment process back in the day when they were still around. According to what I read, they hired people based off of their artistic skills. Because, and this is, sort of a abridged version of what they were saying in the article or whatever, but the general idea is that they needed artists because the people running Westwood Studios could teach all the artists on how to use their programs, operate the computers, and everything else that's technical. But they couldn't teach them how to make artwork. And if you think about it, Command & Conquer has like a lot of artwork in it that's, hand drawn, and that's probably why it has that, like, it's not the only reason, but it's probably part of why it has that style to it, which it has. Because if we think back in time, like, I know Command & Conquer isn't exactly the oldest video game example you could be using, but that being said, it's, by no means a new game anymore. So by the time that, they were hiring, Westwood Studios were hiring, there probably weren't any educations like we have nowadays that focus both on the artwork and game development sides. Like, people probably didn't have both experiences. You were either like a programmer who ended up doing video games instead of, software, I assume. And as a result, like, anyone who was making artwork for your game might be just that, an artist more than a programmer, and have very little technical experience, since it wasn't as widespread back then as it is today. People today grow up with that kind of stuff. So, like, to get back to what I was thinking about, like, I wonder when we're gonna see game development related educations, if we don't already, of course. I could be wrong, like, correct me if I'm wrong, please. But I wonder when we're gonna see educations that teach both, the artistic side or sound development side, or any specific role that you see in a game development company, but at the same time also focus down on like the technical aspects, because there are some technical things that could be very handy for artists to know in terms of how game engines operate specifically. And I'm a mediologist, which is a university-based master that you can get over here, and a bachelor too, but I got both. And that means that I've had my experience with a little bit of everything. So sound processing, image processing, both like AI-based image processing, but also, image processing in Photoshop and similar. Basically everything that you can imagine from a media technologies point of view. I've kind of messed with a lot of things. Game development being the main thing that I wanted to focus on, which is kind of why I did it in the first place. But like through that, you sort of get like a lot of varied experience, and in terms of game development. And there's a lot of stuff in game engines that, if you knew about them, you could cut off so many like frustrations when you're trying to communicate or getting things done right the first time. Like you could save so much time, effort, and I guess at the end of the day money, if someone who's working on artwork would know some of the technical, not necessarily limitations, but more like how a game engine, for instance, functions behind the scene. Because there's a lot of weird things where, as I mentioned, like just in my example of doing this Rimworld mod for Unity, there's that whole thing with the textures, aspect ratio and all that stuff that gets into play if you want to improve the quality of your your visual representation for the game. And since it's what you're looking at, you should probably take that kind of stuff serious, and that's just where I wonder when we're gonna see, if not already, educations that take into account all these technical details as part of their study program. And we had like, one semester, for instance, where we just had one course worth 5 ECTS. For reference, you basically had, like, in our case, a main project which was 15 ECTS, and then 3 courses alongside that, which were another 15 ECTS. So the idea is that over here that you have like about 30 ECTS every half a year. So each semester, right? In terms of classes and all that. So the ECTS being like a kind of currency, and each ECTS translating into a certain amount of hours of time that's expected you've spent with this given topic that you have obtained your ECTS for. And we'd only spent like a few courses here and there on like some technical things, so I don't see why it wouldn't be possible to... Okay, we did that one easy. Got 3% of track. Okay, it was kind of worthless anyway. Oh well. We got it now. But yeah, I don't see like any issue as to that would prevent us from implementing that into these study programs. Especially like, sure, I could spend time like either teaching people in my team that are less aware of these kind of things, but it would just be more convenient if they already knew at least about the basics to begin with. You don't need to be a professional game optimizing programmer in order to understand how textures in a video game get processed and how you can like improve the quality of everything at virtually no cost either. Sure, like you can optimize things in terms of compressing images at runtime before they get loaded into your video memory on your graphics card and all that stuff. But the question is, when do we also get to that point where computers just get so good that we don't even need to worry about it? Rimworld is actually a very good case of this, where the bottleneck is barely, like, sure, it can be the GPU, but more so than not, it's the CPU that's the bottleneck for that game. So if that's the case, then do you really need to worry about a lot of texture compression? I don't know. I mean, there are mods out there that also improve the texture compression methods in the game. Well, not really improve the methods themselves. The mod just changes the presets on the textures so that it uses, well, a different image compressing method, which is cheaper to do or about the same, but provides a better quality. And that's just a game engine setting, That's like something you can do for free, as long as like it's free to do in terms of computer performance cost and stuff. So it's a peculiar thing too, because who's supposed to know this kind of stuff? Is it the programmer or is it the artist? I mean, the artists are the ones that have to work within all the assets, and to me that means that preferably the artists would know about this kind of stuff. But then it comes to the fact that the programmers are the ones that are going to be tasked with optimizing the game at some point, which, there's a reason why there's something called programmer art. As an artist, the last person I would entrust my hard work with would be a programmer. No offense, but if you're only a programmer and you have no pre-existing experience in artwork, which you might have, probably should leave it to the artists. But then comes the other question, because what about the masking textures, for instance, used within Rimworld as an example, or the ores? Should those be sort of carried out and created by the programmers or the artists? Because it's tied to the artwork, but it's also tied to what I assume in Unity is a shader in this case, in order to achieve that effect, which was probably made by a programmer, not an artist. It's a weird thing, right? And I wonder if that might also be a thing that might pop up one day, because video games, they're big business. Now, also being big business means that the game development scene is expanding, and since it's the a branch of the entertainment industry that's, has virtually no capacity limit, as long as there are video game ideas out there, you can hire an virtually unlimited amount of people in order to make those projects come true. Which means that, unlike a physical job position, let's say, there are no restrictions on how many people can sort of work in this industry. Which also means that, given how we're moving more towards And this gets a little bit, I guess, what is it called? Sociological? As like a thought process or whatever you want to call it, philosophical thought process. But as we move more towards like things being like digitalized, like digitalization, and workplaces get like optimized through the use of robots. Granted, we still need someone to take care of the robots when they fall apart and all that stuff, or get stuck or whatever, and also just keep track on them, making sure they're doing what they're doing, etc. You know, there's always going to be an operator at some end. But anyways, as we move more towards those kinds of jobs, I assume that we're also gonna, you know, see more and more people that have increasingly more spare time on their hands, or rather time that they can spend doing other things work related, which means that, you know, we're just gonna see more and more people also requiring or probably seeking out jobs within game development. And I wouldn't be surprised if one day we're gonna see like entirely new job roles appear within game development. Like, for instance, could you imagine that that we eventually get people in there whose only task is to polish and optimize, like, just, they're not gonna straight up, they probably already have these somewhere, but they just don't address them separately, but like dedicated developers, let's generalize it, say, that only work on polishing up other people's work. So kind of a little bit like what level designers do in some instances. Also just, you know, general programmers do. Take all the different elements from the different branches of development and put them together, so to speak. But not just put them together, but also continue work on them so that it gets polished. Kind of like a combined role of quality assessment and implementation, I suppose. Because QA, normally, as far as I am aware at least, don't really have a direct hand in anything implementation related. Instead, they focus entirely on testing out parts of the game before they're considered polished, and have like IRL use case test scenarios that they carry out with real people in order to get a real life, some kind of real life feedback on what needs changing and what needs focusing on, most importantly. It's it's gonna be a wild, like, progress. I don't know. It's either that or roles are gonna become less strict in game development and more fluid. I mean, effectively, you would most likely still want to keep everyone in your team dedicated to working on their, you know, specialized field of work rather than anything else. But, you know, so that they don't get distracted, and also so that you make sure that, you know, you get the highest possible quality work within a given field to do to make your game as good as possible, right? But sure, if you're like a jack of all trades and you never really do like a good enough job in any of the fields, then the game probably suffers from it. That being said, though, you can still be a jack of all trades in terms of understanding, just not implementation, which is the main difference to take away here. I think it's And that's kind of what I'm saying, is that it would be as I said, it would be useful for them to at least have an understanding of these things. Because just having an understanding means that, you know, your brain picks up on these things whenever you come across them. And it, more importantly than anything, this actually is something that, to me at least, ties very well in with how most educations work from what I have personally experienced. The focus never seems to truly teach you something, because retention is really fucking hard if you don't do it on a regular basis. Like, say you learn the most complex, like, you know, concepts within math, but then you don't use it for a year and then you get your bachelor's degree. Did you ever truly learn how to, you know, use those complex mathematical, you know, methods and such? Yes, I would say. It's just you forgot them because you didn't use it on a regular basis. So the main thing here is that you didn't 100% learn, like, you learned how to use them, but then you ended up forgetting how to. But the main thing to take away is that you know what it is. You know about it, which is a huge difference, right? Because that's the difference between being ignorant about things in existence and not knowing how they work, but being able to at least figure out how they work. And that's where having a very broad understanding of a lot of topics can be very helpful, because no longer are you stuck in the ignorant sphere of your limited knowledge, but you have like very varied, broad experiences that you can reach out and hold on to. And whenever something pops up that's relevant to you, you can go back through your memories, because if you passed your exams, you at least had an understanding of it at some point, you know. At that point, you can at least go back and look up the things that you no longer remember. And that's like how most educations function from what I've experienced. They never focus on teaching, like there's no way that you would be able to remember, you know, 5 years worth of curriculum on the day that you graduate. There's no way that you would be able to remember 100% of everything that you were ever tested in. Heck, as they say, and don't necessarily quote me on this, but like, it's been shown or whatever that if you were to take like a test about a week after you took a test that you passed, like say you went and you did a test within a very specific topic, say like I don't know, image processing or something, within like a certain field, and you passed on your first go at the exam. If you went to that same exact exam just a week later after you went to it, and it was the same exact exam, there's a very good chance that you'll fail the exam, because you'll have forgotten, just in like your retention is just completely gone. And that's because, you know, as many people will probably say, a lot of the curriculum and exam methods for like teaching and learning or subsequent learning is not really, like, you don't get examinated on your ability to use said things that you learned about. Granted, some topics might be very theoretical, so putting it into an actual application, like applied in some sense to in an exam context, might be virtually impossible if it's not project based, because there's just not enough time to work with it. Like, to give you a more concrete example, for instance, in my case, I had a course called, what was it called again? Let me just give me a moment to think about it. Shoot, what was it called again? When you're put on the spot, right? Can't remember shit. What was it called? It's not multimodal perception and cognition, it was something else. It was interactive user experience and design or something, like interactive design, I think it might just have been called. And the thing that we, hey Prophet, blah 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 blah, blah blah blah. I don't know what you're referring to. Is that the noise of my brain trying to like start or something? But yeah, basically the point being that that course, which was just a single semester's course of 5 ECTS, is like an entire study that you can take as well. Exact same contents, exact same like concepts, things that you learn. It's just our course was an abridged version of that entire education. Sure, lol. Well, Prophet, since you're in chat, how are you doing? Actually, let's go to Streamraiders. Maybe get this thing started. Because I have this hard challenge map waiting here. Just stroking your beard, left knee is bumming? Bumming or humming? Or is it burning? And stroking your beard, like treating it? Like brushing it, or are you just being like, yes. Bumming meaning acting up hurts. Oh, okay, like in that way. I getcha. That sucks. I get that sometimes when my knees like freak out, but usually when that happens, it tends to be because of temperature changes. Like, at least from what I've noticed about my own body, I suppose I can say. If I sit still in like a cold room, my legs just do weird things, like they spaz out at random, or become uncomfortable or unpleasant. Never hurting, granted, but probably because the muscles around the kneecap like contract or expand in ways that it's like I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's kind of like you feel the need to stretch your legs because they just feel uncomfortable. Yeah, I guess that's my best explanation. Did you pop in a while ago, or have you been here for a good minute or two? That was basically the same. Have you been here for a while, or did you just pop in now? That's what I meant to say. And not Rimworld today either, though I have been talking about it for like an hour or so. Which I've been looking a bit at the mods again, but it's like Fluffy stuffed floors isn't updated, which is a mod that I always use. Ah, okay, just hopped in. And I know you were like one of the other days you were in, say like, oh, this isn't Rimworld, I'm out again. I believe, if I remember correctly. So, but do believe me when I say I do want to get back into Rimworld. It's just, it doesn't feel like a good time to go back into Rimworld. Because, like, I could do it, but then have like a different colony concept that I want to try out. But instead of doing that, I decided to just take a break from Rimworld so I don't get burned out from it and just play some different games and see how well they do on stream. Never said such blasphemy. I don't know about blasphemy. Speaking of blasphemy though, I still want to get that religion game Godhood a go. It was very cool. Well, I know it's pretty cool. I've played it for quite a bit. I just haven't had the time to get back to it. Spent like like one of these past days I spent all day just playing through Forager and finishing up all the things that were still in need of doing. If you know that game, it's pretty good game. Not super expensive and provides a lot of content, if you will. Fell off the back of the work truck last month, right onto your left knee. The lower leg has been acting up ever since. Yeah, ouch. Ouch. Work truck. What kind of work truck is that? Like, are we talking about farming, or within what kind of job are we talking? Or is it like a forklift truck kind of thing? Weed spraying chemical setup. Okay, so farming related, I suppose. Or not necessarily farming related. I guess it could also be like we're clearing out weeds on the side of the roads and stuff. Of course you would know. I mean, it's your line of work, but yeah. Yeah, it's because the reason why I mentioned forklifts is because over here they call them trucks or truck. Regular cab, lead bed back. Oof. I'm not that strong with car terminology or vehicular based terminology, let's put it like that, just to generalize it. I don't even have a driver's license, so I'm a little bit lost, I am afraid. But at least it tells me it's not like a super tall machine then. Because as far as I know as well, like on forklifts you're not supposed to ride on the back anyway. That is not allowed. So I assume that wasn't the case. How are we doing on all these? Houses have been upgraded. Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, seems like we're due for a bit of a courier setup. Guess we can just do that over here on the marketplace side of things. The reason why over here is because that's right next to where all our stockpiles are. But yeah, Prophet, I just published my first ever Rimworld mod today, so that's cool. There are some things that I've noticed that I might want to change in like the coming weeks, but yeah, it is pretty neat. If you're interested in taking a look, here it is. It's just the beginning though. Although this mod in particular is fully like complete in terms of what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to go together with some other mods that I'm still working on. It's just that in order to do those other mods, I needed to do this one first because I wanted to wait, what? Did that happen? Huh. Also, I'm on the wrong overlay. No one's saying anything. But the game did just crash though. Okay. So for how long was I on the wrong overlay? I think as long as I talked with you basically. Or since you came in. Swoops. And that happens. I must have misclicked onto my Genshin Impact overlay by accident. Getting a little bit I need to figure out how to sort of sort all that stuff at some point. Make it a little bit more organized because that's not good. The game does autosave very frequently as far as I know though, so we should be fine. But we did get this objective built though. Holy Potatoes spell cost reduction by 10%. That's actually really good because this spell is universally applicable no matter what meta you're using. And we get a perk loot chest. And it's a good one, or a big one. Also tends to have better perks inside. Nomad appearance rate. What? That's a stat that you can improve? Hold the phone. That's awesome. That's like a really good one. I think the colors on these outer edges also represent their rarity. It seems to like be where the orange ones are the more rare ones. The most common are gray, then you have like uncommon I suppose, which is green. Then you have blue, which is like rare. So I guess that makes orange like epic or legendary or whatever. But yeah, dissolves spell radius increase. That's really cool. I wish we get that on the fire spell. And then increase success chance and resurrect spell. I don't really think that's useful because I rarely ever see that spell fail. Huh. Oh well, it's something. But that nomad appearance rate, where the heck did that get like chucked in at? Because they are sort of sorted here, I believe. Ah, at the very bottom, here it is. Pretty good perks. And those are perks that I've never seen before, so keep getting interesting. So you say you drive Ford F350 pickup trucks, manual station. Are you just trying to tease me now? Yeah, I know what a manual is. I'm not completely lost behind the truck, but yeah, I'm not that knowledgeable, generally speaking. So a flatbed. Okay, yeah, I understood that much. Yeah, so it's just an open back end, and then you fell off there. And then I suppose your weed spraying chemical setup. See, when you said that, I thought you meant like it was like a truck or something kind of vehicle with like all the hoses and all that stuff for the spraying equipment to like go on to like something that you hook on to the vehicle. and you sort of drag it along with you. Or whatever it was. Okay. Good, good. Though, to be honest, I could have seen that it would also be pretty funny, like, you're just trying to, like, tease me. Because it wouldn't matter to me personally. I don't take that kind of stuff personal. Because I know that I'm not knowledgeable within the field, so there's no reason to get, like, miffed about it. But yeah, I don't have a driver's license, but I do have a truck driving certificate. And when I say truck, it's a forklift certificate over here. And that's because in Danish it's called gaffeltruck, which is a fork truck. So instead of a forklift, the direct translation would be a fork truck. So basically some kind of truck vehicle that has forks on it, I guess. The Danish language is very literal when it comes to a lot of things. So we're on day 16 in the first year, autumn, and the corruption is completely gone already. Now, I would have gotten rid of it earlier if not for this almost catastrophical incident that happened over here, but thankfully I saved it before it got worse. Propane and or battery powered, all free. Propane, wait, no, both. Yeah, it's not the, yeah, I don't remember if we had, no wait, I think we had gasoline driven as well. There were a lot of different kinds of forklifts, but they're all just like within the same umbrella term, so. Okay, we've got a blood moon, shouldn't be a problem. We've got like so many golems around to take care of us. But yeah, I drove, I learned how to drive all kinds of different forklifts. It was like a 7-day program, like a week-long well, actually a little bit more than that. It was a week and 2 or 3 days, I believe it was, where the last day was the exam, so it takes you about 7 days, like 7 work days to complete. And each day you would basically drive a new vehicle. So they were on rotation, and then then it was like 50-50 driving and theory whenever we had, well, actually it was more than that. So it was 50% of the time we were driving, in quotation marks, and the 50 other percent we were just learning theory. But during the driving sessions, all the vehicles were on rotation through like a schedule, which meant that some of the time when we were driving was also spent brushing up on theory, just without a teacher sort of conveying the knowledge. It was like through self-teaching, through like some videos and stuff. Not too terrible. And it was basically like some of the vehicles were for indoor use only, like the reach truck, for instance, which of course is electrical. But we also had outdoor trucks, that forklifts that were electrical, which were like a bit on both. So you were like driving from inside on the shelves, with goods and then taking them out, those goods out into a container that would be just on the outside and then back again, of course. We also had the, what do you call those again? We call them pallet-lifter, which is just an electrical pallet lifter thing. I don't know what it's actually called in English, but it would just also be like a, you know, a forklift. It's just the ones that you use your hands to like, with like a steering stick or whatever, to like move around and such. And then we also had the propane ones. I think we had gasoline driven ones. I could actually be wrong. It might all have been propane, and then just some of them were electric. I think that might actually have been the case. Yeah, I think that might actually have been the case. Because there were so many different kinds of trucks there. Or forklifts. But yeah, then the gas driven ones, the propane driven ones were all for like tasks set out on the outside entirely. So you got to do a little bit of a few different things. And by default, you only had like a few hours with each particular vehicle variant each day that you were driving. So if you wanted to get more hours and to try out some of the more difficult vehicles, you had to sort of organize that by yourself. Yeah, pallet jacks, that's probably what it is. Pallet riders, okay. Yeah, I suppose I can see why they would be riders, because you can, well, stand on them and they're electrically operated. I mean, they're technically not hand operated, not directly, no, but they're all, yeah. Yeah, I guess they're all hydraulic forklifts too. Unless they're like, no wait, they would all be. Would they? Ah, never mind. But yeah, the sad end to that story is that I can't really use it for anything because I don't have a regular driver's license. So in praxis, practically speaking, I'm not allowed to make use of my forklift certificate because the law over here states that you may operate a forklift if you have the certificate as long as it's not within a what do you call it, a law restricted zone or whatever the fuck you want to call it. And that's not to be mistaken with the term private property. Now your brain really going blah blah blah. Yeah, I guess words are hard, especially when English is not your it's like your second language, and I'm one of those types of people that want to get words correct, both in pronunciation and also in terms of terminology. It's just collateral damage from being at the university, I suppose, probably. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. But yeah, you're not allowed to basically drive them. First, second, and third language. Right, Hamp, right. I thought you were Swedish. Oh, okay. I mean, we get that over in Denmark too. I sometimes do have trouble figuring out how to talk about certain topics in Danish and actually find it easier to talk about in English. But that's again because of the whole aforementioned terminology thing that I was talking about. But yeah, basically I'm not allowed to drive a forklift outside of areas where the laws apply, I guess, like driving laws, road laws, whatever you want to call them. And our teacher made sure to sort of push into our minds what that actually means. Since in many workplaces, as far as I could understand, you would maybe consider, oh, it's on private property, so, you know, driving laws like don't apply because it's private property. But the thing is, any place where you have two different types of traffic present is considered an area where the traffic laws apply. Not entirely, no, Hamp. I'm only allowed to drive a forklift as long as it's in an area where there's only one type of traffic navigating around. Which means that if there are two people in a storage facility that are driving around on forklifts, I'm fine. But as soon as one of these two people, like if the other person steps out of their vehicle inside that storage facility, I'm no longer allowed to drive there, because then there's two types of traffic present, and then the traffic laws, like rules, apply. Which basically means that any kind of workplace is like that, because you always have mixed kinds of traffic in those instances, if you will. And as such, you're always like, you're basically always going to be under the restrictions of those rules, which in effect means that I'm not really allowed to drive anywhere. Sounds like a damn headache? Kinda. Another way to visualize it or verbalize it or whatever, our teacher said he only knew of a handful of places in Denmark where you're allowed to drive without a like a forklift without a driver's license. And then just started mentioning all the places where you could take, like where you could learn how to drive a forklift. Because all the teaching institutions have a specific dispensation in order to allow people to drive forklifts without a certificate. Because, you know, how else would you teach people like that? If you're not allowed to drive without a certificate, you wouldn't get any training in. So those are the only places that you're technically allowed to. In, like, if you want to be realistic about things. Or practically speaking. And the thing is, I got this whole freaking license in the first place in order to improve my job opportunities. But at the end of the day, it turns out that it doesn't really matter, because I can't afford a driver's license, both monetary wise, and it would also take a long time to do on top of that. And besides, it's not really high on my priority list to get a driver's license, so yeah, rip to that child. Yeah, childbirth, or what do you call it? Childbirth deaths are pretty common in this game, so I kind of just tuned it out eventually. Because it's a bit out of your control, a little bit like when Rimworld pawns get into relationships with each other. Infant fatality, yeah, that's a better word for it. I'm not entirely sure what you can do to improve it, because you can like look for all your villagers on this list and actually just go like adults, and we can see here that Inga Halliwell here is pregnant, which if I go down to 1 speed, maybe I can freaking figure out where she is. Here she is. And I guess we don't really need the flame spell anymore. But I have this spell here called Divine Blessing. Now, I can apply that to people. Like, it's intended to be applied to a specific, like, individuals. And I think it hit the wrong person. But the general gist is that you, there we go. If you bless a person, then their next offspring will be born a Nephilim. And I have no idea if you can tell in here whether or not someone's a Nephilim or not. As far as I understand, it just gives them higher stats and such. But I don't believe they change the infant fatality rates in the game. Similarly, there's something here, there's a clinic you can build, a first aid station. But as far as I know, it doesn't affect it either. Like it just allows you to craft bandages, medical aid kits, I believe, and then people employed as a medic will also actively go out and heal other villagers if anyone ends up getting hurt. Where you would assume that it would also improve the infant fatality rates. But nope, it does not. So at this stage I just assume that it's slightly random. And more often than not, well, I shouldn't say it like that, but you only really pay attention to the fact when someone dies because of the sound cues that the game gives you. So I personally just always mentally filter out whenever someone dies in childbirth. It's just what it is, I guess. But yeah, we're building these curious stations now so that we can send resources out to other areas. And got a few things that we might want to try. So we've got a bowyer here, but we only have a single person. Now we do have a lot of bows though, so it's not really an issue. But I maybe think we should get another... is it manufacturing, I believe? Yes. Oh, and that's Streamraiders. We'll take a look at that in a moment. Let's just queue up some bowyers here. And yeah, I'll get back to this in a moment. But we do have 13 units over in Streamraiders, so hopefully this is going to be enough. I'm going to put down this buff, even though that we should really take out these charging stations as fast as possible. But since there's only 2, I hope that this is going to be good enough. We'll see. Because although this is the first map of this stream today, it's halfway through the Streamraiders map in terms of the game, so... And it's a hard difficulty map. Seems to be fine though. And Prophet, you get some Berserker Scrolls. So you get to reap the rewards on that one. But we got another gold chest coming up. Which is why I didn't want to just abandon this one and start anew all over again. Motherboard. Okay, so there's just like a power up. Collectible power up that makes units go pew pew. Okay, so this just buffs you. So does that mean that we technically want like some units in both those places, I suppose? So we can put some there and some up here, and then that should be fine. Back to the right overlay though. But yeah, so by making more bowyers and upgrading them, we improve we can get these global refining speeds that improve the rate at which we can produce bows and such. And though we only really need the bows for one of those map-based objectives, we can still sell all these ballista bolts that are also made in the same structure. And the coins that we acquire by selling all of these bolts can be reinvested into iron ore and iron ingots here, which is something I want to start doing. Because as you can see, they only have 7 ingots available, even though we haven't been buying them up whatsoever. And the same goes for iron ore, there's only 13 in stock, so considering how much gold we actually have, and there's not really any other things that I'm really interested in, just really invested into those. There's one more thing we can do, we can buy some keys, of which there's quite a lot available actually. Don't seem to have a storage for them, so we'll just build one of those too. But yeah, Hamp, how are you doing? Haven't seen you much lately. I guess you've been busy playing Rimworld, from what I've been noticing at least. Which is kind of what who did I talk about that again? Did I talk? I don't think I talked with you, Prophet. I think it was... Oh, bollocks. Who was it? Was it 7 Psych maybe that I talked with it about? Sounded a lot like most streams where people playing Rimworld tend to be quite like half of the viewer base basically dropped off for some of the streamers because, not because, but after 1.3 popped out with the DLC. And my guess is that it's just because everyone's been more occupied in actually playing the content than viewing it, so that's what why I'm assuming you've been busy doing the same as well. And again, I haven't been much around. I've been stuck playing ideology. It's a mess. What do you mean it's a mess? Like in what terms? That could mean a lot of things. Like it could be the kind of mess that I was kind of experiencing. The reason why I'm building out to the edge of the map is that as far as I remember that I'm pretty sure that in order for things to spawn at the edge of the map like these wild doggos here, there needs to be at least some kind of land bridge connection. So I could technically have early on build a land bridge up there and maybe they would have appeared higher up than right where the fucking corruption was. Maybe not, but yeah. Keep on getting catatonics and extreme braking risks that go even further. Really? Is that just because you're making it more difficult for yourself with ideology? Because you can make it very easy with ideology from what I learned when I first messed around with it, which is kind of some of the things that is a little bit questionable for me, but have the risk factor at 13 every time. I love it. Risk factor. Not exactly what I was thinking on. I was thinking on some more specific changes you can do. I don't know what you mean with risk factor. I guess I haven't played ideology enough to recall what that is. Unless you're just talking about, like, generally speaking. Similar to how you would say crank it up to 11. what I was kind of referring to is the fact that you can change some settings into your ideology that, as long as people follow your ideology, makes the game way easier or much harder. Specifically thinking about stuff like clothing restrictions, for instance, is a pretty hefty one that you can very easily like that's probably the biggest one. That and cannibalism was also part of it, because you can basically make it so that cannibalism is accepted but like no one cares about it, or you can make it so that you don't have to be a nudist but no one also cares about what clothes you wear. Most of the actual ideology stuff makes the game vastly easier if you so wish. A ton of mood debuffs usually suffer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can just remove them with the ideology at no cost, right? And no like alternate detrimental effects, which is kind of weird. I've talked with Seven Psych about it, and it's like another one of those cases where, well, the base game also has a straight up difficulty slider, so it's just more options for you to take into account that you can decide to use or not use, so as to shape your own experience more, which I think is definitely a valid point, and actually much preferred over, you know, the past system, which was very hard locked into a certain way of play. But on top of that, the animals in fences now are less likely to be attacked by raiders, which actually is very, very useful, and that wild animals defend themselves. So what? They still are just animals. Also, prisoner recruitment didn't feel harder for you, rather more easy, since you now also can shatter their beliefs to convert to you, and that kind of sped up the process. Okay. Well, we got to remember that some of those features are not non-specific to ideology, though. Animal fences are in 1.3 proper, so that's just in the base game now. I don't know about the, what do you call it, the slave system. Is that part of the ideology, or was that like introduced into 1.3, if we can refer to it as that, like the base game into 1.3, because I'm a little bit uncertain about it. Yeah, and neither am I. I was kind of like thinking about the fenced situation as well, because it has produced a few issues from what I can tell. Everything from the updated ideology, well, that's not confusing, because 1.3 and ideology officially landed on the same day, so the update is 1.3 and ideology is the DLC. So and a lot of things were both changed and added with 1.3, so namely like the fences, for instance. So I think it's important to distinguish between the two. Also because not everyone has the DLC. Even before ideology came out, I was having the pleasure of interacting with a modder that the guy behind Tech Advancing, and he didn't own the royalty DLC, which meant that because of him not owning the royalty DLC, it's a bit hard for him to implement and test some of the additions that I was requesting, since they related to the, what are they called again? The tech prints. Since tech prints were introduced in with royalty, so if you don't have royalty, you don't have tech prints in the game whatsoever. But royalties research that requires tech prints were still being affected with and considered by Tech Advancing. So because there were no settings for it, you couldn't leave those out of the Tech Advancing configuration. So what it meant was that in order for you to go between certain tech levels, you also required to first manage to get your hands on all the tech prints for that tier. Otherwise, you couldn't progress. But he didn't have the royalty DLC. And I spoke with him about it, or them about it. I actually don't know if it's a him, of course. But I spoke with him about it, and they said that, the reason why they didn't get the royalty DLC was that they actually wanted to be more inclusive to the rest of the Rimworld community, and they felt that they didn't want to support the active DLC splitting up the modding community, since some people that play, a lot of people that play Rimworld don't have any of the DLC, and now there's 2 of them, right? This was before Ideology was, way before that was even announced. So I think those were valid points, but it also means that modders that don't have the DLC can't develop their mods to be compatible with them, even for like small what do you call it? Not unforeseen, but unexpected potential mod integrations, like tech advancing with the tech prints. But yeah, with 1.3 we got some new stuff, right? So in relation to the fences, for instance, I already very quickly noticed on the workshop someone made a mod that adds in a invisible fence barrier, because they introduce a problem if you're building up against an ocean side, for instance, because water doesn't get considered as a barrier for your fences, since, well, it's terrain, and you know, it's a terrain feature, not a building, not a fence. So that means if you want to build your pastures up against the water, you have to waste a lot of space building a fence across, you know, the outer edges towards the ocean, in order for that region to be defined a pasture or fenced-in area. So a person already made like a invincible fence mod that unfortunately wasn't made for like actual use. It was like only, you could only add it through God mode and stuff. Because they were kind of broken in terms of how they functioned. But it's also like, you know, they introduced the fences, and then we already had a mod that introduced fences into the game, which weren't, you know, implemented with the animal pasture mechanic in mind. So someone else had to went in and made a branched version of the fences mod in order that, well, did this specifically. So it's a peculiar situation for sure. Very peculiar. And then comes Ideology on top of everything else. Hire 30 Khajiit anywhere. Okay, this one is really cool, because we'll get this one completed eventually. It's just going to take forever to do, but we can do it. It's 2 perks, and something tells me that given the God XP rewarded, it's going to be some decent quality perks. And we have so many goal blocks available to us now that we might as well give it a go. See if we can complete that one. But we got to send 170 bows via Courier Golems to Enchanted Shoreline. Doesn't matter where from, so we don't have to technically complete it in one go. But given my style of play, I wouldn't get to carry out this objective anyway before the time of us like taking out a corruption in an area. So since we've already done that in this map, we should probably do it before I move on. So what we do here is we have Enchanted Shoreline here with our Courier Golems. Then we just need to find the bows, which, you know, we managed to send a couple over to this area from Enchanted Shorelines. So all we'll need to do is assign 170 here And then once this reaches 0, that means the objective is complete. So this is one of the objectives that are fairly easy to track. And we can probably sort of beat out this one pretty quickly. Because we have so many people available. So we can just assign them as courier suppliers and get it done in no time. But yeah, we also got some other features, like there's that whole new rendering method that came with 1.3 for you know, pawns, where it all gets baked into a render texture, so it doesn't render a lot of individual parts, right? It just sort of takes all the individual parts, merges them together temporarily, and then it renders that one thing from there, which definitely is a huge improvement. But it has meant that a lot of mods needed to, like, or some mods needed to change the way that they functioned entirely. But in terms of actually making the game easier or harder, how's my mod going? Well, one of them, there you go. The first part of it, at least, which originally wasn't the first part, but rather like a tacked on thing. But that part is pretty much done. There is a little tweak I think I want to do to the compacted machinery. There's some weird stuff with the top coloring going on when you're having what do you call it? Terrain features where the compacted machinery is doing that square thing on the top where it doesn't quite match the coloring, if you will, like the main color of the texture. And I also noticed that for some reason it's way brighter than the ones from the vanilla game, which it shouldn't be, because I literally took the same color used in the vanilla based documents, which is just a multiplied color all over the fucking thing, and I used that exact same color. Like, there's no change to it, but it still came out way too bright, so I have to do some tweaking to make it fit a bit more. But it's there, you can get it. So that still means I gotta do the ore part though, which is gonna take a little while still, since I basically put that on hold until I was done with this part. Where are the fucking farmers again? So that's kind of where that is sort of sitting at, if you will. Okay, I think 12 farmers for this amount of animal pens and stuff might be enough. Since the crops, they just grow on themselves and the animals tend to themselves. You know, they just propagate slowly over time, so as long as you have enough farmers to water the crops and tend to the animals by transporting things around, you're good. Also, I believe the organizers, they might help in resupplying like water buckets and vegetable stores inside those animal farms, so. But yeah, that's my mod so far. I haven't forgotten about it. Actually, it's one of the main reasons I haven't been streaming much. It's just been eating up a lot of time, trying to balance that while also not having like a mental breakdown at the same time, getting, you know, burned out, because I could probably have like streamed way more in the past couple weeks, but the issue is that I would also have been burned out from streaming very quickly. Since even though it's just painting stuff, there's been a couple setbacks on that retexturing mod that kind of they were pretty harsh on me, a bit hard to handle. So most days when I've stopped working on the modding stuff, I was just so fucking done that I just needed to relax. I didn't have the extra energy to also hang out with people. I'm sure you guys can understand how that works. Fully watered. So do these guys need... They can use dirty water buckets. I wonder if the water masters do this. Yeah, they can store it, so they can technically also... They also can work together with the farmers to keep these supplied with water. But I could probably... I think these also require water. Yeah, all these farm areas, they also require water. So to make things a little bit more optimized, let's build a well for water storage and a couple of rain catchers, aka 2 of them. If you want to get some kind of push to show you how good your work is, if you don't include me installing your mod, then 9 unique people have subscribed to your mod. Nice. That's good to hear. I hope that it gets popular. I went through a lot of trouble to make it as good as I possibly could. And since I'm going to be queuing, like, referring to the other mods that, you know, that I originally intended to do later, it might also be a good way to get more people interested in it. Because, like, reskins is something that, like, if it's something that reskins vanilla assets, it's something every single Rimworld user can get behind, right? You know, it's something everyone, that's got everyone's interest at the end of the day. So if you catch their attention that way, and you know they already have one of your mods, if they see there's a mineral mod that goes along with it, they might be curious to try it out. Especially if I do a good enough job on the first one. You know, the seal of approval and all that. It's just so whack to me that there's so many reskin mods out there, but still some of them... Okay, we can only go 2 places. Oh. But still so many of them, they kind of like don't do a good job on the rock walls and all that stuff. Which obviously, you know, big words and stuff when this is your first Rimworld mod, but I would claim that I have experience working with game development from other places, so just because it's the first mod doesn't mean that you don't know what you're doing, at least. But man, like, so fucking many things that I just had to deal with in order to make this mod, it's ridiculous. But you know, the mod is done now, it's functional. Well, it's always been functional, it's just, you know, 4 fucking textures. That's literally all it is. You know, 4024 by 1024 textures. One of them borderline just being a copied variant of one of them. But yeah. I've actually released things onto the workshop in the past, so this is not what do you call it, like, it's not my first thing on the workshop, but it's very different to what I've done in the past. Is there a good way to show off that? Because it's like that thing where Steam being a browser, and if you just pull Steam onto Streamlabs OBS, it just becomes a black, empty void of nothing. But I can try and see here. This is probably one of the better ones. It's like an old ass mod, so this is Gary's mod related for you guys if you're curious about that kind of stuff. Just... there's one of them at least. Can't remember how many does this have. It has currently 17,000 unique subscribers. No, it has had 17,000 unique subscribers and currently has just shy of 15,000. Oh, it is. Okay, that's nice. I was a little bit worried because when I first published the mod, I couldn't find it. Like, I myself couldn't find my own mod, but I think it's because it had to spend... It took a little time before it popped into, like, the search algorithm and stuff. So... Because I was a little bit worried because it's a bit of a weird title, right? Dragons, ore and stone retexture. So it's like if you write dragons, stone and ore, or dragons, ore and rock retexture, then it's technically wrong, and this algorithm goes like, what is this you're looking for? You know, it's a different variant on stone, but it might get confused by it. And that's like one of those things in hindsight I was like, oh, maybe I should have simplified the name even more. Because to begin with, it was actually just called, I think, Draconic Stone or something, or Rocks or some, or no, Draconic Draconic Textures, which is just, you know, the most non-explaining title that you could probably give, right? The only thing that it tells you is that it's related to something that I like. It's made by me, basically, because of my gamer handle and online handle and stuff. Oh, Dragon's Ore and Dragon and Rock works. Yeah, I hoped as much. I haven't really tested it that well, but it makes sense that it would, because that's like very similar terminology. So if Steam's search algorithms couldn't handle like basic Google functionality, Google-like functionality, then we'd be fine. Then we'll be fucked. I mean, not fine. It would be everything then fine. But yeah, I mean, I'm doing the mods for fun, so at the end of the day, as long as people are getting some use out of it, I've never really been too occupied trying to get like the damn things monetized and such. Back in the day when I used to do Gary's mod maps and such, I was actually approached a couple times. Pops up in yours as the first on the list. Nice. Well, I guess it makes sense if no one else has really made anything that is this specific, right? Which is the beauty of it. You can put it anywhere that you prefer in your load order, and you know, it's got it's very modular, I suppose, in that sense that you can put it after the vanilla expanded retextures, for instance, and then you'll have everything else be vanilla textures expanded stuff, except for the rocks of the wall, the ores and all that stuff that then get retextures, you know. So, which is kind of what my idea was. I didn't want to make it part of the ores mod because obviously then you would be forced into having a bunch of extra crap that you might not want, so yeah. Monetize it that way. Well, I guess, I mean, I have put in Patreon links today on all my old workshop content too. I have no idea if it's going to pay off, but you know, it's a thing. And I thought, okay, it's not going to take me that long to do, so might as well try it. Okay, so we've got our Streamraiders thing going on here. Okay, we got all few good people over there. So should we just give these guys haste? I probably can't undo it anymore. We'll try and give these guys haste to make use of that power up, because these enemies are pretty far away. Yeah, we destroyed that thing up there. It's good jobs. You guys did what I wanted you to do. Well, working together is always a good thing. And then the main force can take out the remaining units. Awesome sauce. And Prophet, you get Centurion scrolls. Nice. Oh yeah, and this was the thing where it's like, okay, we can go for another gold chest or a bronze chest. So we go for the gold. I think the path was also shorter this way, so we'll get more in less time, assuming we can actually handle the pressure that is. Doesn't seem like there's any buffs, so I guess the best approach would be to just huddle up in the corner and then take out, you know, enemies little by little. Okay, we'll return to that later. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be using, I mean, of course I'm going to be using the mod myself. That's the main reason why I made it to begin with, but yeah. Found out my name by going into my Patreon. Haven't joined as you cannot join for another 2 years, sadly, but you were able to find that out. Hmm? My name? What do you mean, like my real life name? Pretty sure it says that on my Twitch channel as well, what my name is. I'm not too fussed about it. It's like, these days, especially if you're trying to like make progress, you can't really, like, you know, there's like very little that you can do to actually hide your name. Like, for instance, I also realized, like, sure, I can hide my email address whenever I launch up Genshin Impact by not showing the intro menu and stuff and the player ID and all that. But at the end of the day, I have a LinkedIn account, you know, and a bunch of other freaking crap, and people, it's more useful to me that people know how to contact me than trying to hide it all. So, although, you know, getting swatted is a potentiality and stuff, it's just like, what do you do, right? You can't just hide beneath a rock and then expect like, hey, I'm this nobody, like, person too scared to you know, talk about who they are, but you're also a streamer, and I mean, I assume you guys are here to hang out with me and talk about games and stuff, but at the end of the day, but like, you know, I'm still a person that you want to interact with. So if I'm more open about who I am and such, I think it makes for a better stream. Which goes into conflict with, you know, trying to hide it all. So in that sense, I've just slowly but surely like acknowledged that it might be better to just be less fussed about it, I suppose you can say. With a lack for words. Better words. Especially when you have a Patreon account. Like, that doesn't get more like you as a the person, right? It doesn't get more like that, if you know what I mean. Because it's kind of the whole point of Patreon is that you're supporting a person rather than like a product, right? You're supporting what either the person or the group of people are trying to accomplish. And if I remember correctly, there's even something in their terms of service or whatever, where in the past some people got into trouble because they were wanting to make video games and they wanted to get it all financed through Patreon. But because they were marketing their Patreon in the way that they were doing, it made it seem more like you know, you were paying directly for a product, or you were financing a company and not an individual person. So the really funky part here is that basically changing just the terminology used to describe what you were doing and the description of the Patreon account meant that, you know, you could basically get away with it, no problem. You just had to be very specific about what you were writing in your descriptions. And I kind of find that so weird that it's so like has that kind of restriction to it, I guess. But that's just how it is. It's just that some streamers try to hide their names and stuff. Yeah, exactly. And I get it. Like, it's very scary, especially when you hear the stories about people that get swatted and stuff. Which is an absolutely terrible thing to do towards someone. Even if it's just like I've heard some scary, sketchy stories about people swatting someone else just for the sake of shits and giggles from their end, which, like, in some of the most scary situations I've heard, people have, you know, ended up dying because they didn't expect like a freaking, you know, armed police force to storm their apartment or house or wherever they were like living, and didn't comply well enough to the SWAT team's, you know, instructions, and ended up getting shot and subsequently killed. Which I don't know anything about the level of truth to those stories, but I can see why that would scare someone into being more conservative with where and what they share about themselves. But I think my personal way of dealing with all that sketchiness is just to embrace the fact that you're a public person when you're streaming. And I mean, some game developers also become public, like a very public person, and in the same way a lot of modders also become more of a public person, because you just inadvertently develop popularity somehow. I mean, most likely, right? Because you're making something that other people enjoy, and some people just want to like learn more about you, the person, whilst others want to like get their wild opinions heard by you, and maybe even like fuck with you because they feel that you wronged them somehow. Very frequently unjustifiably, like trying to mess with you. Well, this is annoying. Like, in order to take apart this, well, actually no, we have other means of taking care of this. I was just about to say, getting rid of this fire pit is going to be annoying because you can only deconstruct things that's within your own area. We can just burn it away. It's just wood. It doesn't really matter to me. Okay. And we're doing fine in terms of map. Like supremacy, we've beaten the freaking corruption ages ago. In almost half a year. We could have done it sooner had it not gotten sketchy at some point, but you know, maybe next map it's going to be easier. It's also probably got to do with the fact that when this map was started, like the only landmass we had out here in the water was like a small island here. Oh, that was development mode or whatever. Yeah, we had like a small bit of landmass here, and like a little bit of landmass down here where we now have a giant forest. Like that was just a handful of trees originally. But yeah, all this island that's extended outwards, all this sandy beach area, that's all like man-made. So yeah. We could probably make a road here. Oh shoot. I did like another brain fart. Okay, I can definitely feel that I'm not streaming that frequently at this. It's probably also because I've been working on textures today, finishing up that mod. Thanks for the heads up, Hamp. I was on the Rimworld stream layer. So that's why you saw my hand background. That's basically like, instead of showing my desktop, I just have that image as like a backdrop. So if you see that, it's usually only whenever I end the stream, or if, like in this case, I forget to switch over to the correct thing. So another one died during childbirth, or another child died during childbirth. Like, the women always seem to be fine, it's just the children just kind of often don't make it. And I don't understand why. They get all kinds of different foods, and they have the highest quality housing you can get in the game, so I am a bit uncertain as to why they end up dying. But yeah, so let's take that one again, I guess. So when we originally started this map, all we had was this little island. Like, there used to be a little island up here, not further out than where these rock formations are going, with just a bit of landmass in between, like all these circles here. That's where rock, you know, is used to be. So if we use the motivate land spell, it's gonna come back. And then down here where we have this really big forest now, it just used to be a handful of shriveled out trees and a small additional island that wasn't even connected to the main one. So all this extra sandy beach area here, yeah, that's all like man-made. So there we go. It definitely helps when you can actually see what I'm doing. It's just small streamer issues when you don't have like 100 people to like keep an eye out for you. And I know it's not your guys' job. Obviously it's mine, but you know, whoopsies do happen. But yeah, I wanted to make this land bridge here to the east because we're like sending out things. And mine. Yeah, I guess you're right. That's a good point. Also, Hamp, I remember very long ago now, I suppose, when you got mod, or modded, you asked about like more control and stuff. But honestly, I think I much more prefer it this way, where you can't just like put in you know, additional commands whenever you see something that's missing. I like to have that sense of control where I know what commands exist and get added and such, not to mention the phrasing of, you know, all the text that goes along with a lot of the commands. So basically, if there's ever anything that from a modder's perspective you think could improve the stream, or a command that's missing, or anything really, then it's better to just, you know, notify me and I'll get to it. Muhu actually got the Patreon thing tested out the other day, where he gave me like a month of the lowest tier, so that was kind of nice because there was a lot of things in there that were impossible to test beforehand that weren't implemented correctly, like the Discord groups weren't assigned appropriately, for instance. So just like with that, everything else that's on the stream is a work in progress, you know, and the work never really stops. At least in my opinion. I think there's always going to be room for improvement. And, you know, with that said, it's probably also one of the better approaches when considering this kind of stuff anyway. That you're never really truly done. Dusk has arrived. Yeah. So let's check up on how we're doing on Enchanted Shoreline and bows. Okay, we still need to send 88 bows across. And now each of these courier golems can send more than one bow at a time. It's just they're dependent on organizers and not provisioners. What are they called again? Courier suppliers, in order to sort of fill them up with materials. Think about it. How many waymakers do we even have? We only have 3. Let's try and get some more of those, even if just temporarily, until we have a lot of the road constructed, because it's not really going that fast. And we have a lot of road to build, so... Reynold James grew up. And see, that's... whenever that shows, that's where I would assume you would be notified that they would be a Nephilim or something, because... I don't think the game really notifies you, truthfully. It's just... you just gotta kind of know. Yeah, if we look into our villager efficiency, when it comes to like wood and stone and such, I haven't even bothered going up to like 90% on this map because we just never needed to. I mean, our stockpiles are pretty full at this point, even the processed stuff. It's just really iron that we're, you know, running out on because, well, you're always running out on iron. There's a better reason for it. Like, part of the reason why we're running out of iron constantly is because it's a chance to mine iron whenever our miners excavate some of these rocks, and because it's a chance, it means that our rock stores end up getting filled out way before our iron stockpile. And as soon as we run out of space to store more stone, I don't even think our miners do active work, really. They might try and stockpile stuff, but when they're getting that, you know, full of resources, what would you do, right? You wouldn't really have any options of doing anything else because you can't really put the resources anywhere anyway. And because of that, you know, there's no opportunities for gathering iron ore on top of what they of the stone that they would be gathering. So kind of just ends out in a situation where you're not getting any iron ore anymore, which at that point you need to consider getting your marketplace running. And, you know, that said, the sooner you get the marketplace running, the better. Because the more trade deals you get to make use of over time, because everything in this game is over time, so... The question is, do I want, like, a marketplace in this area? Like, more marketplace? marketplaces. I'll try and see if we can squeeze in some more. Because I never figure out if it improves the supplier restocking of well, the supplies, I suppose. The things that get offered up on sale. It's such an impossible thing to like know unless you get told that that's how it works. I don't know if we still need 2 rangers, because all they do is that they kind of collect animals, but now that we have all our clucker coops and animal pens up and running, I don't see the need for 2, since, you know, the animals will just proliferate in there and multiply over time, which is going to be, I assume, more efficient than running around the map constantly trying to collect more. Though I do believe you can continuously do that throughout the rest, you know, for as long as you want. It's just not viable is all. Yeah, corruption resistance went all the way into outskirts of the map here, so there shouldn't be any fear of the corruption rebounding out of nowhere, since it's all like been covered. I've had that happen though, where I removed like one of my, what do you call it, defensive line fire pits after I thought that the area had been cleared out for oh, the QB golems also picking this up? Oh, interesting. So they are also capable of dismantling. Well, that's useful to know. But yeah, I'd essentially torn apart like a fire pit right at my defensive line on that map, given map, and immediately the corruption just spread out into the rest of the map, into areas that were not covered by corruption resistance, and just quickly took out over half of the map and just immediately began spawning enemies and buildings everywhere. It was a fucking nightmare, and there was nothing I could do about it, and ended up costing me the map entirely, because what do you do? I mean, what do you do in those situations? Nothing. You can't do anything. Because anything that you're trying to like save from the corruption, like you're basically starting the map over, except on hard mode, because now the enemy is all over the place. They're no longer condensed. You might already have redistributed your structure budget, so you can build the defenses necessary to survive, even if you had the resources, because, you know, time is of the essence again. So what do? You kind of just start over. that's what you do. You give up and you start over. But that goes back to something I said last week when I was streaming this again. You kind of just want to be able to like see how many tiles are left on the map in terms of corruption. Just like a number would be nice, because that's literally like the check mark that, okay, everything is safe, and you don't have to like get anxiety because everything is like can go to shit in like 2 seconds. It's probably the worst part about it. Okay, so we've been expanding this out here, which is why all the buildings haven't been built. Because when you're destroying terrain features, the game just decides that that's more important than building structures, so all your construction workers get reprioritized into taking out one of these at a time. Like they take out multiple times before going home, but you know, it takes a while. So what do we have up here? Flowers. Oh, there's like these black kind of flowers. Do they, doesn't really show up in the desirability thing because that only shows up amongst your buildings. I have no idea if the flowers have any kind of functionality. Oh well. Not really that important. So, what's it looking like? Okay, so we've already got 24 people en route? Damn. And that's just to like that one map. Though it's a little bit funky to me that what do you call it? This map is like only connected to 2 separate areas. And obviously, you know, one of them is where we came from, which means that there's literally only one way to place to migrate to. And I wanted to go out here because I wanted to check up on our goals. And just sure enough, another holy potato spell cost reduction. Okay, I'll take it. Then we got another mission here to harvest 500 crystals on Coast Bridge, which is the map we're on, but 500 crystal on a map where our crystal stores are pretty much filled. That might be a bit difficult to achieve. 6 days to unlock this goal. I think we're pretty close to this second goal here. So 41 plus 20, so that's 61. Right, so 2 days time we unlock another goal, technically. Shit. Which means that in 2 days time we should probably check the world map no matter how much progress we've made. Can't even build a marketplace here because the range on these courier stations are too short. It's useless. Well, not useless, but just not good enough. Rat sleepy has prepared to leave your village. I'm taking a look at the time. Do you guys want to try a different game out? Because I've got a different game that I kind of want to try streaming a bit of. I think might be something you might consider pretty cool, Hamp. It's not a lot of you guys in chat, you know. We can do that kind of stuff, no problem. I'm listening. Alright, let's go and give it a go then. I'll just do a quick end and start of the stream again just so that I get a cut for my YouTube stuff, just so it gets separated. But yeah, that's it for Rise to Runes today. But the game that we'll be looking at is called Godhood. So I don't have a stream set up for it yet, but we'll figure that out as we go. So I'll be right back in like